Well, hey everybody, I'm John Rethlin with a retro review when ECW was born 25 years ago. It actually took place yesterday on the 27th. I'm recording this on the 28th, depending on when this goes up. But some of you may be wondering, and the reason is basically I recorded like 2 hours worth of content yesterday. I was just simply too tired. So that's why you're getting this video today. Now, ECW actually was created back in 1992, founded by Todd Gordon. And then, Paul Heyman came in as the creative mind a little bit later, and things got a little more violent and stuff like that, and things took off. But it wasn't for like about a couple years until, things actually took off and it became Extreme Championship Wrestling. And that's actually on this night, August 27th, 1994, when it took place. I'm not going to go over the entire backstory here because Paul Heyman would be able to explain it. Dennis Carluzzo, he was a member of the NWA at the time. NWA was just a bunch of regional independent territories or whatever. It definitely wasn't what it was back in, back in the territory days, or even now with what Billy Corgan's trying to do with the NWA. But there was an NWA title tournament, and it was Shane Douglas versus Too Cold Scorpio. And this is when ECW, even though they were having some violent stuff, it was presented with a real sports feel to it. And Shane Douglas and Too Cold Scorpio had a pretty goddamn good match. I'm down on Shane Douglas quite a bit for my own reasons. I mean, we all have people we like and don't like. But I will say for a period of time, Shane Douglas was a great, main event guy that they had in ECW. And he was a great heel. He really was a great heel. And he was great in tag teams in WCW. And even for a period of time, was pretty goddamn good. I actually think that he's pretty underappreciated as a tag team worker. However I feel about him in later WCW and his run in Impact is what it is. On this night, there was this double cross concocted where, Shane Douglas was going to become the NWA champion and ECW is going to work with the NWA and stuff like that. But Heyman knew that we need to get, being like, ECW, him talking to his roster saying, we need to get away from the NWA. It represents the old regional feel. We want to shake things up. We want to do all this. So they come up with this idea where Shane Douglas is going to, Shane Douglas and Paul Heyman are going to double cross Dennis Carluzzo, who again, member of the NWA board, or at least somebody that was figured in on this, with the whole thing with ECW. So Shane Douglas wins the belt. He's talking about all these people and everything, dedicating it to his dad, talking about Terry Funk and a whole bunch of guys, Dusty Rhodes, Ricky Steamboat, and Ric Flair. And he talked about the NWA title. He says, this is it, Dad. He says, and they can all kiss my ass. And he throws down the title. The NWA title, which was pretty goddamn prestigious at the time. I mean, I would encourage you guys to check out this promo because it's one of Shane Douglas's best promos. It really was. It was a great goddamn promo. And it did ignite the flame that, just started, it started to boil everything with ECW. That pot of water was just boiling and boiling and boiling. And it was just stewing. And then just finally exploded, very soon after that. ECW was born when Shane threw down the NWA title with all its lineage. I mean, all that lineage. He threw that down. Great promo. And then they even got Dennis Carluzzo to cut promos about, Shane won the NWA belt, that he's upset and that he will defend it and this kind of stuff. Heyman basically double-crossed the guy just as a way to get buzz for ECW. Now, it's not the first time Heyman lied. It won't be the last time Heyman lied. And I'm not going to necessarily reference all that in this video. But with this, ECW was born. Things got more violent. It became, grunge rock, that kind of stuff. There were a lot of times ECW went pretty goddamn far. On this night, it did create a whole lot of buzz, and that was what ECW needed at that point. Because even though they had some fans and stuff like that, and people were starting to, get into it, because, WCW at that point, they had Hogan, and they hadn't brought Savage in yet, but WWE is very cartoonish and that kind of stuff. Yes, presenting wrestling as a very sports-themed attraction was the way to go, but at the same time, it wasn't what, the Philly crowd, the New York crowd, wasn't what that portion of the East Coast crowd wanted. And when Heyman and Shane Douglas did that and, they did the double cross, it helped ECW become what it was. And for years and years after that, for a period of years, I will argue that 1999 to 2001 ECW, even though there was some good wrestling, was goddamn terrible. Creatively, even though the talents were trying, the company was just running on fumes at that point, especially by 2000. But here are my thoughts on ECW, and I've done an unpopular wrestling opinion on ECW before, and I will not chew my food twice on that, but I will quote something, as best I can from what Cody Rhodes said on the Monday Night Wars, the episode of ECW. ECW had some really good ideas, but for every one of those, there were like 7 or 8 were, my God, this is horrible. And that encapsulates my feelings on ECW. Now, I'm still going to continue to talk about ECW here for a bit because there was some good shit. They presented a lot of really good wrestling. Eddie Guerrero, Dean Malenko, that kind of stuff. Two Cold Scorpios, somebody that really was featured well there. He was featured decently in WCW, not so much in WWE. But yes, ECW did start working with WWE after that because it was a way, A, to help out WWE and, to basically get some buzz for WWE because they had fallen on their goddamn ass. They were losing. They were losing the war big time. And ECW helped spark some interest in WWE. Going back a little bit in 1995, yes, they did the Taipei death match where it was between the Rotten brothers. It was Eden and Axel Rotten, and they, the idea was they taped up their fists, they dipped the tape in glue, and then dipped the tape in broken glass, and then punched the shit out of each other. ECW went a little too crazy with the violence. That is something that always bothered me. And I didn't mind violence in wrestling. Wrestling is a violent sport. It is. And it is a sport, despite what some people say. Now, I'm not saying go out there and deliberately hurt your opponent. There's stuff like that in deathmatch wrestling and some other hardcore bullshit. I'm very 50-50 when it comes to hardcore wrestling. But from that whole time of Shane throwing the title down through like the next year or two, ECW did get a whole lot of buzz. They were not on pay-per-view yet. They were doing internet pay-per-view, but internet was very much not the norm at that point, even though some people had some good connections and stuff like that. The internet wasn't what it was today. It wasn't even what it would be like in like 2005 or 2006 when Vince relaunched ECW. That was fun. But anyway, from that whole incident, the 1995 Summer of Violence and that kind of stuff, you had Tommy Dreamer and the Sandman, the whole caning incident that I believe took place in Singapore where that boy got caned because, yeah, that whole thing. I don't remember the boy's name, so you would have to look up Singapore caning incident, 1990s. I think it was 94. They built that whole thing around. They got Dreamer over because he was just a suspenders-wearing guy that was a good babyface, and he was a good worker, but the crowd just didn't care about him. Once he got, took all those cane shots from Sandman, he became the innovator of violence. He would, grow this feud with Raven, which was a pretty goddamn good feud. You had the Raven-Sandman feud, where Raven got, Sandman's ex and even Sandman's kid. And if you see Sandman's kid, and I don't remember his kid's name, and you see Sandman at that time, there are times where maybe you could debate if somebody is somebody's kid. Oh no, you could totally tell that was his kid. And that was some good stuff. It was real family drama and this kind of stuff. And Heyman liked to use realism despite going all kinds of crazy and everything. And sometimes he went a little over the line. Oh wait, the crucifixion incident with the Sandman. I'm not a religious person, so this didn't necessarily offend me. It bothered me because it was unnecessary. It's like, oh, look, Sandman's getting crucified. Why? Like, why the hell was that happening? Mixed in all this was some really good wrestling. Do not get me wrong. Do not misinterpret. RVD was arriving and putting on some great matches. When they finally got on pay-per-view, Barely Legal 97, even with some botches, the production value was great. They built up Taz and Sabu to mythical status. It wasn't quite what they wanted it to be because it was almost impossible for them to deliver on that, even as good as both those guys were at that time. Sabu being the creep and the weirdo that he is now, that's another story. But for that build, Taz and Sabu did a whole lot of good shit. They really did. And, the history and the lore of ECW grew. The problem is ECW kept doing all the violent stuff, and they would do it in segment 1 or segment 2 or this kind of stuff, and they couldn't follow up on it. Eventually, it got to where, okay, if you didn't fall through 3 tables, you were going to get booed. Yes, a lot of the crowds did appreciate when people put in some good efforts and put in some great performances. and beat their bodies up. They did. But then it also became where there were portions of the crowd that were just upset, like I said, about not going through a couple, 3 tables, and they only went through 1. Or let's set the table on fire, but oh, you didn't go through 2 tables set on fire, so we're going to boo you. It became a problem because it came to where you couldn't follow up on it. ECW's lack of discipline, mainly from Heyman, where yes, it was a fun grunge rock alternative promotion, it got to where things just got out of control. And the wrestling still could be good. They emphasized tag team wrestling at a time when WWE really wasn't. Now, WCW was to an extent. Then when the NWO came in, they kind of got lost in the weeds there. Even though in 99 they were still having a pretty stacked tag division and pretty good tag matches, ECW would always base some good programs around tag team wrestling. The Dudley Boys, RVD and Sabu, even though they were an unlikely alliance. They would have the Impact Players. They would have, Justin Credible and Lance Storm. I don't know why the fuck I forgot about that for a bit. They were a great team. They were later in ECW, but still. They did feature some stuff about the women. They did stuff where, like, I believe it was Beulah and Kimona, I think, is what it was, because Sandman, or not Sandman, but Dreamer and Beulah were dating, at least on TV, and they actually are married in real life. Shane Douglas was like, oh, we're doing this whole thing, it was wrapped around this whole Raven angle. And Beulah's cheating on you, and then she did this thing where she kissed Kimona, and it got them, the lesbian kiss angle got them kicked off of TV. Because TV was sensitive back in the 90s. It's a good thing homophobia doesn't exist anymore, except it does. From a bunch of idiots. But, that's another story for another day. ECW did push a lot of boundaries. They really did. And to their credit, they did help save WWE. As much as I don't want to give Heyman credit on, some stuff, and I feel that he went way too overboard, had WWE not embraced the attitude of ECW, and it was ECW's Influence, you know what would have happened? WWE would not be around. This would be a whole different thing. Vince was going to lose. Vince was losing everything because for the first time in his life, he was getting his ass kicked. He didn't like it. He needed, new talent. He needed a way to embrace attitude. Now, he didn't like it because he had to listen to the fans. Vince doesn't like listening to the fans, no matter what people say. But with that, you had, I think it was it King of the Ring 95? King of the Ring 95, you had the thing with Mabel. And I think it was in Philly. And then you had Mind Games in 1996. That was in September of 96, headlined by Shawn versus Mankind. They had the ECW thing, that kind of stuff there. And it was a way to kind of build a bit of a cross brand with them, where Heyman was getting a check from Vince for Too Cold Scorpio, because Too Cold Scorpio had it was like a music deal or something like that with his entrance music, and Heyman basically was, not him specifically, but ECW was being financed somewhat by Vince McMahon. That money was actually helping keep ECW afloat, because ECW has some really good ideas. They did, and I'm not going to quote the Cody thing again, but they didn't have the funding. And you could argue that if they had the funding, that it wouldn't have been as good as it was, because they survived literally by the skin of their teeth. Some wrestlers were beating their bodies up, like crazy. And then you get to the whole thing where they go with WWE, and they have it's some TV that got some attention. I wasn't the biggest fan of it, but it was different, because I was taping Raw at the time and watching Nitro, watching Nitro Live, that is. But it did get a lot of attention. And yeah, even though it didn't last long, you did have RVD get some more attention on Raw, and he was a good heel. And you did get the thing with Jerry Lawler. And I mean, Jerry Lawler, the P stands for pedo, even though there isn't a P there. But as far as somebody that was hated by the ECW audience, very few were hated as much as Jerry Lawler. Maybe Jim Cornette, because he made an appearance at one of the pay-per-views. But Jerry Lawler made an appearance and Kane, Tommy Dreamer, and the Testicles, but Lawler's just railing against him. I think RVD and Sabu were his allies there, and a couple others. But he says, "So this is the famous ECW arena, huh? This bingo hall ought to be made out of toilet paper because there's nothing in it but shit." I will say this now: never been the biggest fan of Jerry Lawler. But I will say, as far as getting heat, he was pretty goddamn good at getting heat there. It was old school Memphis Heat, cheap plug, I guess, for that whole Memphis Heat movie that came out. But Lawler really was somebody that represented the old guard, and it was like a way to get the ECW fans pissed off, where the ECW fans worked themselves into a shoot. Poor Dreamer, though, he had to get actually blood taken out of his testicles because Lawler accidentally caned him too hard. That was a great story, though, and that was some great stuff. RVD and Jerry Lynn had a great series of matches in '99. There was some really good stuff, but WWE and WCW kept taking talent from them. I'm not going to say poaching, because guess what? ECW wasn't paying their talents enough. They had to go somewhere else to earn money. Sandman, Mikey Whipwreck, Public Enemy, a whole bunch of others went to WCW. And, Public Enemy had that short stint in WWE, and that didn't work out all that well. ECW did foster a whole lot of talent and did foster a lot of people that went off and did a whole bunch of, great things in wrestling. The Dudley Boys went to WWE and then to TNA and then back to WWE for a bit, and then Bully Ray is now booking Ring of Honor into the ground, allegedly. Or at least in my opinion, and according to a lot of people. But the ECW influence is still felt. Now, I do kind of wish people would stop chanting ECW, only because it's a wrestling promotion that died, 18 years ago. But its influence is proven with the fact that I'm talking about it right now. It still means a whole lot. Now, it goes back to that incident, or that NWA title incident with Shane Douglas and Paul Heyman double-crossing Dennis Carluzzo. Now, yeah, throwing down a prestigious title like that was one thing, but hey, you want to get some buzz, you got to piss some people off. And sure, the double cross maybe wasn't what everybody's cup of tea was. Some of the wrestlers that even were interviewed about it didn't necessarily care for it. But it made the press, it got the attention, and ECW turned everything on its head and got the attention that it wanted, for better or worse. Now, the company did flame out very, very quickly. It would have been very interesting to see what would have happened had they gotten on network TV again. I just still don't think ECW would have survived much longer. I think ECW would have survived maybe another couple years. But that's another story for another day, basically. My whole point of doing this is to talk about how, the Shane Douglas incident did what it did, caused a buzz for ECW, and then Heyman couldn't, Heyman had no discipline with it. And even though he came up with some good angles and there was some good shit, 1999 to 2001, early 2001 ECW, sweet Christ, there was some good shit, but there was a lot of stuff where they were just, they were out of gas. It was like, it wasn't AWA stuff, because they were still selling out their pay-per-views. They were still, selling tons of merch and everything, but they just couldn't have the funding. They just didn't have the funding to keep going. So ultimately, that's kind of what did ECW in. What did WCW in was a whole bunch of bullshit. But what are your guys' memories of ECW? What are some of your guys' memories of Shane Douglas throwing down the NWA title? Did you like it? Do you think it's what sparked ECW? Do you think other shit sparked ECW and made it what it was? When do you feel the ECW basically died? Was it when the company went out of business? Or do you feel that the company was like kind of well before that? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Like, share, subscribe, Twitter handle in the description. I'm John Ritland. I'll see you soon.